Hey everyone, welcome into another edition of TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I am your host, Shad Dales. Today we're going to focus on big news out of Washington where Democrats have once again filed a bill to federally legalize marijuana, while at the same time President Trump is weighing whether to reschedule cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act. So today we're going to break this down, what's in this new Democratic bill, what would rescheduling really unlock, and how do the two paths compare descheduling versus rescheduling. We'll also talk about what this means for patients, companies, and investors like you. So with that, let's get in today's TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. First up, let's talk more about the MORE Act. Representative Gerald Nadler of New York has once again introduced the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. This is the fourth time he's filed the bill, and yes, it's the same legislation that already passed the House twice, but stalled in the Senate, something we hear time and time again. So what's in it? It would remove cannabis entirely from the Controlled Substances Act. That means descheduling, not rescheduling. It also goes a lot further. We're talking about expungement of past convictions, resentencing provisions, and a big emphasis on equity funding for communities harmed by the war on drugs. Nadler put it this way, quote, "It is a long past time to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level, expunge convictions, and reinvest in communities harmed by the war on drugs," end quote. So the MORE Act is bold. It's sweeping, but can it actually move forward in Congress? We'll come back to that in just a moment, but first let's look at the other side as to what's happening in the White House. While Democrats are pushing for descheduling, the Trump administration is considering a more limited step, which is rescheduling cannabis. As I've explained further, that would move it from a Schedule 1 where it's lumped in with heroin and now something into like a Schedule 3. Now, if that were to happen, it doesn't legalize marijuana, but it does unlock new opportunities. For example, as I said in an episode earlier this week, universities like Harvard and Johns Hopkins could finally run federally funded cannabis studies. Hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic could begin clinical trials for pain or cancer care. And big pharmaceutical and biotech companies could start exploring cannabinoid therapies with FDA approval in mind. And then again, there's the business angle too. Rescheduling would make it easier for large corporations like big alcohol, big tobacco, and even big pharma stepping in. So on one side, you have Democrats saying, let's go all the way. But do you believe them? And then on the other side, you have Trump potentially saying, let's take a first step with rescheduling, which is probably the more practical approach at this time. This is all incremental. So now let's look at how these two approaches stack side by side. If cannabis is rescheduled, research barriers come down, clinical trials open up, and corporate investment will start to grow. But rescheduling does not address criminal justice. It does not expunge records. If cannabis is descheduled under the MORE Act, then here's what comes into play. Everything from rescheduling still happens: research, corporate investment, and access. But it also tackles equity, expungement, reinvestment, and a clean slate for millions. Politically, rescheduling is easier. It could happen faster through executive action. Descheduling, it's going to be much harder. Congress has to make a move, and the Senate is the roadblock, which we've seen time and time again. So again, the incremental step of rescheduling seems more practical at this time. So now let's talk about what this means for different groups. First, for patients and doctors, rescheduling means new therapies down the road, more evidence-based care. Descheduling means wider access and protection from federal penalties. Now, from universities and hospitals, rescheduling opens up research floodgates, while descheduling removes restrictions entirely, making cannabis just another research field. Then for cannabis companies, rescheduling lets them partner with labs and medical centers. Descheduling then removes federal barriers, making banking and investing much, much easier. For big tobacco, big alcohol, and big pharma, rescheduling opens the door. Descheduling throws it wide open. And for communities harmed by prohibition, rescheduling doesn't really help, while descheduling puts equity front and center. So now the question is, what happens next? We'll be watching the DEA and HHS closely. If Trump decides to act, rescheduling could move quickly, maybe even in the next few weeks. On the other side, Nadler and House Democrats will push the MORE Act, but the question is, can it clear the Senate this time? It's a question we've asked time and time again with many bills. But it may come down to timing. Rescheduling could be the short-term move, descheduling may be the longer-term goal. Either way, the conversation has shifted and will really shift if if rescheduling were to take place. Lawmakers will start to view this in a different way. So what does that mean in conclusion? Well, cannabis reform, it's no longer about if, it's about how far and how fast. So that's a wrap here for our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. The MORE Act is back on the table, offering full descheduling and justice reform. Along with that, Trump is weighing rescheduling, which opens up the door for research, business, and investment. Let's face it, both paths, they have momentum, but they deliver very different results. So saying that, now I want to hear from you. Would rescheduling be enough, or should lawmakers push for full descheduling and expungement? Let us know by leaving your comments below. And as usual, if you found this breakdown helpful, give it a like, smash on that bell for all notifications, and make sure to share it with your network. And as I always say, greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe to us here at TDR. We're in the waiting pattern right now, and I know a lot of people are getting a little impatient, but now is the time to be patient because what's going to happen is going to happen. So enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you back here next week. In the meantime, like I always say, stay open-minded, stay connected, and I'll see you next time in our latest TDR Cannabis in 5 presented by Dutchie. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and thanks again for watching.